But K-File's extensive reporting now shows the two shared a close social circle for nearly 2 decades, from private jet flights to high-profile parties, and that's only part of the story. Photos, flight logs, and court records help reveal how long their personal history really was. K-File's Andrew Kaczynski is here with all of that, and it is some extensive research and reporting that you all did. You've chronicled this relationship between Trump and Epstein from the 80s to what, mid 2000s is obviously when their contact probably cut off. What's the most striking thing that you find that kind of contradicts this? Donald Trump is no fan of Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, so what we found, it really actually paints a portrait starting, as you said, in the 1980s up to the mid 2000s. It paints this portrait of a long, enduring friendship. I think there were several associates who have called them best friends. Epstein himself said that he was Donald Trump's closest friend for 10 years. And we looked through these hundreds of hours of video, hundreds of photos. We went through documents from court files, exhibits from lawsuits. So we really chronicled this whole relationship through time. And one thing that I found really interesting was these flight logs from Epstein's private jet, which were part of that investigation into Ghislaine Maxwell. And they really tell you a story of how close these guys are. Look at just a few of them. This is in 1993, for instance. This is the same year that we found as well that Jeffrey Epstein attended Donald Trump's wedding to Marla Maples. Trump flew on that plane 4 times with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell between Palm Beach, where Mar-a-Lago is, and where Epstein also owns a home. Let's fast forward then to 1994. Trump flew from Palm Beach to Washington, D.C. with his then wife, Marla Maples, his daughter, Tiffany, and a nanny before they returned to New Jersey that day. In August 1995, just he and Eric were on board with Epstein and Maxwell again. They flew from Palm Beach to Teterboro in New Jersey. And then in January 1997, Trump flew with the pair from Palm Beach to Newark, New Jersey. All of these trips, 8 in total, were documented in logs that I mentioned were from that trial.
You also took a look at what Donald Trump himself has said about Jeffrey Epstein. What did you find?
Yeah, that's right. And one of the things that's always been so striking is that quote that he said in 2002 that we found in that New York Magazine article where he said he was a terrific guy, he liked beautiful women just like him. And then that quote where he says he likes many of them on the younger side. That was from an article entitled Jeffrey Epstein, International Money Man of Mystery in New York Magazine. Now, just 2 years later, we were going through Donald Trump's book, and there he had one called How to Get Rich. And then we wrote in his book that somebody named Mysterious Jeffrey had called him, and that you could see it right there. That's the passage from his book. He says Jeffrey calls in, but there's actually a lot of activity between these two in 2004. One of the things that was seized from Jeffrey Epstein's home during that initial investigation to him in the mid-2000s were message pads. And on those message pads, there were if you look here, 2 messages from Donald Trump in November of 2004. This is around the time the two of them actually were competing to buy a property in West Palm Beach. Trump ultimately won out. He beat Epstein, and this is allegedly part of what made their relationship deteriorate.
Yeah, Donald Trump's talked about that as well. Your review also, I mean, you looked also through tons of photos and tons of video of Trump and Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell together from Mar-a-Lago to here in Manhattan. Walk us through kind of some of those moments that you found.
Yeah, Kate, and these images, they really speak for themselves. In November 1992, there's an image that a lot of people have seen, and it's of Trump and Epstein, and they're dancing there. You can see with models. I think you can see Ghislaine Maxwell in the background if you look. She was there just a second ago. Just a year later, we had found, or previously, Epstein was at Trump's wedding in 1993. That's the photo there on the left. 1997, you can see in that photo on the right, that's them at a Victoria's Secret Angels event. And then in 1999, this that I found in some archives shows Trump and Epstein, and they're actually chatting at a Victoria's Secret fashion show. In 1997, he was also photographed with Maxwell at a fashion show. These guys attended a lot of fashion shows together, it looks like. And then in February of 2000, there was an event in Mar-a-Lago that featured not only Trump, Epstein, and Maxwell, but also Prince Andrew was also at this event, and these images were initially published in the Palm Beach Post in the year 2000. So there's a lot of public appearances, and it definitely undercuts Trump's claim that he was not a fan and they were sort of just distant acquaintances.
So what is the president saying about this?
So we reached out to the White House. We asked them about all of this, and it's on CNN.com. If you read the timeline, it's very extensive. They didn't respond to any of the detailed questions that we sent, but Stephen Chung, who is the communications director for the White House, sent along a statement that said, quote, "The fact is that the president kicked him out of his club for being a creep." So it's going to be interesting to see, because he says they weren't close. He says he was not a fan, but we continue to just see more and more revelations come out.
Yeah, and we've heard that similar statement from Stephen Chung many times about questions that linger. It's great to see you. Great reporting as always. Thanks, Andrew. A key figure in the Epstein case, who later worked for President Trump, could soon be called to testify under oath. Alex Acosta was the prosecutor who infamously gave Jeffrey Epstein a sweetheart deal in 2008, a deal that allowed Epstein to serve minimal time in prison, and a deal that shut down the federal investigation into his alleged sex trafficking ring. Acosta then went on to serve as Trump's first-term labor secretary. For reasons unknown, Acosta, the man who would know everything about the Epstein case, was left off the House Oversight Committee's list of subpoenaed witnesses. But tonight, a Republican on that committee, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, is telling the Palm Beach Post that calling Acosta to testify is not, quote, off the table. She also says at any time he can be called.
Spencer, your sense of how these survivors can potentially open the aperture on transparency?
Thank you for having me on. You know, it's unfathomable that we really forget about, throughout this whole process, survivors. They are the ones that matter. You know, these are victims of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and these are the people that want their voices heard. So it is wonderful that they're actually bringing them to speak. In addition, they have always wanted full accountability, not only Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, but on behalf of everyone that was part of this conspiracy from the beginning. That's why they want the files released.
And I guess, Spencer, what would be satisfactory to them? Save a full disclosure of all of the files. What specifically from this do you believe would say, okay, we've moved the needle a little bit?
I think at the end of the day, we have always pushed for an executive order from Donald Trump to release everything that is in the custody of the Department of Justice. You know, when he's passing these executive orders for the National Guard in D.C., slip in an executive order that says, oh, and by the way, release all the files. They've got thousands of hours of videotape that was confiscated from Epstein's mansions in New York, in the Virgin Islands, and in Palm Beach, where I'm at. Release the videotapes. Protect the victims, obviously, because they were minors at the time. But everyone else that's on them, let the world see who was there and let them account for why they were with Jeffrey Epstein when they were there.
Andrew, I have been suspicious that this would actually play out in courts, that this was really a question for the court of public opinion. But I think Engelmeyer's ruling shows you that it is possible for the courts to play a role here, because they're calling the administration out for their BS.
Yeah, absolutely. So Paul Engelmeyer, the district judge in New York, who had the motion by the government saying, we want you to release the grand jury transcripts and exhibits, he said exactly that. He said, you want the government the illusion of transparency without the reality. And he said the only reason that he could think to actually release this would be to show that the government is lying. I mean, it was a striking opinion. And the reason he said that is that he said, look, the grand jury transcripts, which is a tiny little universe of data, everyone agrees it has nothing in it. There's nothing there. As he said, there's no there, to sort of paraphrase Gertrude Stein. And so he's saying, look, that was never going to be the end game. That was never going to be something that you were either going to get. And even if you got it, and it was released, there was nothing there. Meanwhile, the government has agreed it has 300 gigabytes of information. They do not need court approval to turn that over. as your guest has just mentioned, an executive order could turn all of that over right now. Pam Bondi could turn all of that over right now. So that is why Paul Engelmeyer really called out that you wanted the illusion of transparency, not the reality of it.
They were really using the court of law to try to influence the court of law.
Right, because do they even need a public, an executive order? Like, this is the government. Couldn't the Department of Justice, they already combed through the files and went to tell the president where he was in them.
Yep.
So don't they know?
The president has the authority to release all of the files right now, as he promised people that he would do. People forget here that Donald Trump created this situation. You remember the day that this guy was found hanged in the cell or committed suicide. The president was out retweeting conspiracy theories. That's day one, before the medical examiner could conduct his review, before anybody can conduct any investigation. They created this themselves, and they're still trying to dig their way out of this hole.
Spencer, this is just your take on this. This just has to be very stressful,
frustrating.
Yes, and frustrating. Yes,
20 years. I have been trying to help these victims get their story out.
Make this crystal clear. The best case scenario for Trump is that he is all over the files, that he is on like every third page, and he didn't do what Epstein did, all of it. That's the best case in my mind, because despite the narrative from Trump that he's been trying to push the last few years, this for a long time was a good friend of his. Right? And a lot of that friendship did happen before the allegations went around the world and all of that, to be clear. But he was on, like, the news is talking about Trump and Epstein and flight logs and things like that. And it was the plane in particular that it was alleged things, not only that plane brought people to and from the island where a lot of bad stuff happened, but that bad stuff in some cases happened on that plane in particular. Like, it was, that was the express in which a lot of the bad stuff happened, right? And so Donald being all over the files is the best case scenario. Because the worst case scenario is he's all over the files and he was doing all of it every step of the way. Like, best case scenario is he was there and he was never implicated directly in the most severe forms of conduct. Now, to be clear, that doesn't really absolve Trump because, one, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right? That means that maybe he just didn't get caught, right? That some number of people won't get caught. Like, he did it, but you know what I mean? Like, if he did it, allegedly, then, maybe that's possible. But then it also raises the questions. If you didn't do it, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you say anything to stop it? Why didn't you confront him? Why didn't you go to police? You were at the time a rich and powerful man that wasn't like seen as politically polarizing. People would have believed you if you said it. Like, you weren't some like 19-year-old girl, and people tend not to believe them, right? That's one of the reasons this went on. People would have believed you, Donald, and you said nothing. So that's what's going to happen here. It's only going to get uglier because in most people's minds, he was either an accomplice or he looked the other way.